Good morning and afternoon to all of you across the country. And I would like to welcome everyone to the Benefits Alliance Group Keynote Speaker Series. My name is Mike McCowan, and as the president of the Benefits Alliance Group, I'm really excited to be here today and help introduce our speaker, Susan Hodkinson. As always, our Keynote Speaker Series really focuses on highlighting the challenges and issues faced by employers across our country. We're so excited to continue to offer this thoughtful content to our advisors across Canada. Now, as our advisory team was reviewing our next Keynote Speaker Series, we thought it was incredibly valuable to continue to examine the challenges facing employers as they continue to navigate COVID-19 and its impact on the workplace. As the title suggests in the slide, how do businesses find that balance between organizational and personal needs? It's a challenging line that employers face as they continue to navigate mandates, vaccines, and continue to operate in 2022 and 2021 and 2022. Now, lucky for us, we have a fantastic speaker with us, Susan, who is here to provide a practical approach for leaders. Now, a bit about Susan. She's the Chief Operating Officer at Crowe Soberman, which is one of Canada's largest accounting and advisory firms. In addition to her role as Chief Operating Officer, she is also the partner of Crowe's HR consulting group. Susan works with organizations of all sizes in aspects of all HR, including policy development, planning and strategy, as well as transition and succession. So a perfect speaker for us today. Now, as always, we would love to hear from you. So if you have questions for Susan, please use the chat feature below, and we're going to answer as many of these questions throughout the presentation. So Susan, thank you so much for joining us again. I'm going to pass it off to you, and I'll be back at the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here, and good morning, good afternoon from wherever you are at today. It's my pleasure to speak with you all today. As Mike said, I have a couple of roles in my firm. I have my internal role and my external role. And so in those roles, I have been both managing our own firm's response to this entire situation that we've been dealing with over the last 18 plus months, as well as providing assistance to our clients. Our client base is very much like a number of your businesses. We are generally the accountants and financial advisors and business advisors to private business, small to medium to not so small and medium-sized businesses in pretty much every industry and area that you could possibly imagine. So we have really gone through, this process with all of our clients and have a whole bunch of different perspectives in terms of how we got here and where we go for the future. So Chris is going to advance my slides today. So let's talk a little bit, next slide please, Chris. So today we're just going to talk about introduction and setting the stage, a return to work, so hybrid work, remote work, institutional, who's in charge, the great resignation, and then getting to the great vaccine controversy and all the rules that you need to pay attention to, a few conclusions, and then hopefully some questions and discussion. So next slide, please, Chris. Thank you. So introduction and setting the stage. Next slide. So here's our timeline. And I set the timeline out because we all know what the timeline was because we all lived through it. But I think there's a bit of an overarching shift throughout this period. And so, late in 2019, early 2020, we were hearing about this news from far away. And there was really this sense of it's a long way away. It's in another continent. In our firm, we had a particularly interesting connection because one of our senior tax people, her family is in Wuhan. And so she had actually planned to go to Wuhan to spend Chinese New Year with them in January. In fact, she did go to Wuhan, never made it quite to the city, but she did. So we were we were watching a little bit more closely, but generally it was all a bit detached for us. And then by sort of February-ish, it started to get closer to home. We started thinking about, well, this might really come here and we really might have to deal with it. And then March 2020, of course, I think it's March 13th, 2020 was sort of the great rush home. We picked up our computers and our books and our pencils, and off we went to work remotely. And I know that for us, I know for myself, I remember taking a big box of files from my desk home and thinking, this is fantastic. I'm going to be working at home for probably a week or two. I'll be able to get a lot of work done. I'll be able to get some stuff done that I don't have time to do when I'm in the office. And of course, you know, how much wrong could I be in that analysis? And I think that in that period of time, though, that March to 2020 to fall 2020, we were really in this kind of short-term emergency mode. The adrenaline was really flowing. You heard an awful lot of people say, we're all in this together. Let's all support each other. Then it morphed from we're all in the same boat to, well, we're not in the same boat, but we're in the same storm. And again, how do we support each other? And this real sense of kind of unity and everybody working together. And then fall 2020 came and people started saying, so when are we going to get back to normal here? I mean, we started to feel burnout, we started to feel fatigue, we started to read a whole bunch of stuff about mental health being the other sort of unforeseen implication of the COVID-19 pandemic, all of the isolation, the uncertainty and all that stuff. And it started to really have an impact on all of us. And then by the time we got to Happy New Year 2021, then we were starting to think, well, first of all, maybe normal won't be normal anymore. Maybe it'll be beautiful, new normal. But I think the other thing that we saw happening then was we started really seeing divisions. And so there were divisions between businesses. So what's good for the business? What's good for employees? What do employees want? You know, we've tried to support them in any way that we possibly can, and they're still burned out. They're still tired. They seem like they're really angry, and they're angry at something and somebody, and it might as well be us as the business. And then also the great division that started to happen over government intervention. So are vaccine passports the correct approach? Are vaccines themselves the correct approach? And how do we balance all of the things that are coming out of this? And so rather than us all be back, you know, a year ago or a year and a half ago when we were all kind of, you know, linking arms and, you know, marching into battle together driven by our adrenaline, we're now tired and we're burned out and we're kind of annoyed by the whole thing, and we haven't had, you know, good normal relationships up until this past Thanksgiving, you know, that we haven't been able to have our friends over, et cetera, and we're just generally burned out and kind of, excuse my expression, just pissed off with the entire thing. So now we're starting to think, okay, so things aren't going to go back to normal. How do we craft that new normal on a go-forward basis? So next slide, please, Chris. So next piece, I'm going to talk a little bit about return to office and hybrid working and remote working, and how, considering all those kinds of things, you have to think about all kinds of implications and applications to them. So next slide. So return to the office. So there's all kinds of new considerations to return to the office. And so even businesses that are saying, yes, we're all going to go back in full time, we are not going to accommodate remote work or hybrid work, there's some issues surrounding that. They still have to deal with other issues. So for instance, if you are in an office building with elevators, you have to deal with restrictions on your elevators. And so if you want your entire workforce back in your office, and there's only 2 people allowed in your elevator at any given time, which is the case in my firm's office building, well, let's do the math and figure out how long it's going to take people to come up to the office. What about public transit? Whereas people maybe felt very comfortable taking public transit to work before, maybe now they're not. And how do you deal with that? So are you looking at staggering hours? Are you looking at staggering shifts? So what are some of the ways that you actually can facilitate people returning to the office within the office? What about distancing? What about making sure that people have the opportunity to go out for lunch and have a lunch because you don't really feel like you want to be bringing food into the office because people aren't comfortable with that? And the comfortable thing is a big issue. People need to feel safe within their organization. And, you know, we always have the obligation, I'm going to talk about this in a few slides, under the Occupational Health and Safety Act of providing a safe workplace for our people. Well, safe has taken on a whole additional meaning since this. So it's not just a question of feeling safe from catching the actual germ of COVID, but it's actually a question of feeling safe in your environment, feeling that you're working in a psychologically as well as physically safe environment. So then we start thinking about hybrid. So some people are in the office, some people are out of the office. Do you do that on a day-by-day basis? Do you do it on a position basis? Do you do that on a week-by-week basis? And how do you deal with it? how do you actually ensure that the people who are working out of the office are not disadvantaged and the people in the office are not disadvantaged? How do you ensure efficiency? How do you ensure camaraderie? How do you ensure learning? All of those kinds of things. And so what you have to do if you're going to be working on this hybrid is to be much more intentional about what it is that you're doing. So the natural flow of, I have a question, so I just sort of tuck my head next door to my coworker, or I stand up at my desk and yell over the bullpen divider and say, hey, Joe, have you ever dealt with this before? Not as easy to do when I may be in my office, or I may be at home, and Joe may be in the office, or Joe may be in his home, wherever his home is. And so rather than actually letting that kind of natural camaraderie, natural cooperation flow, you actually have to put some real intentional structures around it. And then there's remote work, ongoing remote work. So you might actually hear from your employees, why do I really have to come back to the office? I've been working remotely for 18 months and it's worked out just fine. From their perspective, at least, it's worked out just fine. So should you be considering permanent remote? The other issue, of course, especially for those of us who operate businesses in the GTA or other major metropolitan areas, whether it's Vancouver or wherever else, you know what a war for talent that we always have. So perhaps this means we can look further afield with respect to recruiting if we think we can maintain an efficient remote work situation. So there are all of these kinds of things to consider as we go forward. Next slide, please. So here's the issues for consideration. So one of the things we hear all the time is the institutional versus the individual needs. So what's more important, what the business needs or what the individuals in the business need? Well, I might submit to you, and this comes from my human resources roots, that doing good HR is doing good business. And so perhaps it is the case that the institutional needs and the individual needs are in fact very much in harmony. At the end of the day, you need people who are committed to your business, who are working efficiently, who are engaged, who are not looking to actually take flight, which I'm going to talk about in the next bullet point. And if your business is to be efficient and productive and service-oriented and all those other kinds of things that you want your business to be, one of the most important factors in that is an engaged, committed, dedicated workforce. So it might very well be that if your individuals say that I can manage my entire life better, I can holistically be more committed and happier working on a remote basis or working on a hybrid basis, perhaps it's incumbent on the institution, the business, to look at how that might be accommodated. Now, I'm not suggesting, I definitely understand that there are many positions that you have to do in the office. Even within our environment, we have a core office services team that manages mail going in and out, that manages checks going in and out, all those kinds of things. That group needs to be in the office. That's very much part of the smooth running of our business. However, we have learned to do most of our functions without someone being in the office. And so looking at figuring out that balance at institutional and individual may be more of an aligned situation than you might otherwise think. So the Great Resignation, I'm sure that many of you have seen media pieces on this phenomenon. According to some stats that I just pulled off, Microsoft, they interviewed or they surveyed 30,000 employees in 31 countries, and 54% of the Gen Z, so these are our younger than millennials, these are our younger employees, 54% of them were actively considering quitting their jobs. And overall, all employees, 41% were actively considering quitting their jobs. This was back in the spring of this year, 2021. And there was a survey done in the US by Prudential with 14,000 subjects. And of that, 42% said that they would likely quit their jobs if they were not given the opportunity to work remotely. So it's not just remote work or non-remote work that, in fact, is driving this whole Great Resignation. And I would submit to you that part of the issue is that people are just bored and they're just tired. And they haven't been able to go on vacation. They haven't gone anywhere. And so the idea of actually quitting their job and getting another job, at least it means there's something different for them. And so, the whole concept of having large numbers of your people resign obviously strikes fear into the heart of most business owners and most management. So what does it need to do about that? So I would suggest to you that in this day and in where we are right now, employee engagement has never been more important. So you really need to be thinking about whether or not you're engaging your employees, watching for signs of disengagement, watching signs for presenteeism, which is I'm still here, but I'm not really here. I'm kind of mentally checked out. Some turnover is healthy, as we all know as managers and business owners, but massive turnover, particularly when we are in a particularly vulnerable position as we are getting back into sort of a new way of working, can be incredibly disruptive. And so looking at this great resignation piece is a really important piece for business owners. I have a committee within my firm who I meet with about every 6 weeks or so to kind of get the pulse. So there was a great article that was actually circulated to leadership in the accounting firm world last week, which was, these are why all of your people are quitting. And so I circulated that article to my think tank group. And I'm going to sit down with them this afternoon and say, what did you think of the article? So tell us what we can be doing. The other issue is that as businesses, you can't beat yourself up too much. We've had a few people leave and go on and seek their fortune elsewhere. And we work very hard at exit interviews. And through those exit interviews, basically they all said, you're doing everything you can. I just need a change. You're doing great. I just need to do something different. And so if that's the case, then that's what you need to do. That, of course, takes you, though, onto how you deal with replacing people. And so I'm going to use the word intentional a whole bunch of times through this as we talk about how to manage through this environment. You have to be a lot more intentional with your onboarding and a lot more intentional with how people actually get to know each other. So you really need to look at your space requirements, and you could really be thinking about technology. If any of you have environments that have probably more than 30 or 40 people, there are some fantastic technological pieces out there that will allow you to actually book space within your environment. So not only will that ensure that if you have people coming in and you want to make sure that they're appropriately spaced out, it also gives you really good data as far as who's coming into the office when. And that might be able to help you make some space ideas or space considerations on a go-forward basis. So here are some of the many, many things that we're all thinking about as we think about whether or not we're going back to the office, whether we're going back remotely, whether we're going back in a hybrid way. So next slide, please. So vaccines. I suspect this might be why a number of you are here to talk about vaccines. We took a fairly early position on vaccines. I think we had the distinction of being the first public accounting firm in Canada who came out to the press saying that we required that all of our individuals are fully vaccinated in order for them to come back into the office. And in fact, the deadline for providing proof of vaccine has just passed. So we have just moved forward on that now. That's a very complicated process to go through. And so I thought we would definitely take a good few minutes to talk that through today. So next slide. So here are some geographical differences that we're dealing with. I am aware and delighted that we have a cross-country audience here. But as you can see, there are definitely geographical differences in terms of the percentage of individuals who are fully vaccinated. You can see that it ranges from in the low 60s all the way through up until the mid 70s. Now in Ontario, because we are located in Ontario, so I am probably more fixated on what's going on here. Here in Ontario, in order for us to move out of stage 3, which is mandatory masking, mandatory separations in things like elevators and workplaces, every single one of our public health units has to be at least 70% vaccinated. And so it's not just a question of, well, Toronto is 70% vaccinated, our businesses in the city of Toronto, therefore we can move. Well, we can't move, because one of the things that, of course, we figured out going through this process is that particularly in large metropolitan areas, the people who are in the areas that have the low rates, they will simply be inundated with people in the high rates moving to their areas for the services that are available there that might not be available at home. And so the position has been that everyone, each of the public health units has to be 70% vaccinated. And we're not there yet. A half a dozen or a handful of them are not yet vaccinated. So you can see that we've still got a long way to go in terms of being consistent. So then vaccine requirements. So the earliest province was the province of Quebec, and they put some passports in place September the 1st. But each of the jurisdictions in Canada now have some level of vaccine requirement. And effective October the 30th, the trains, planes, and automobiles rule will come in, and in order to board a plane or a train or a public bus here, you will have to be, as a city bus, you do have to provide proof of vaccination. One of the biggest issues, though, with respect to vaccination requirements is that when you read the ruling from province to province, there's a very important word that shows up in some of them, can require versus require. And so what this basically says is that in some jurisdictions, that restaurants can require proof of vaccination, but they don't have to require proof of vaccination. Here in Ontario, the can word isn't there. It is required, but that is not the case in a number of other provinces. And so as you can see, there are all kinds of differences here in terms of how people are actually managing this. When we first came out with our policy, I actually was interviewed by the CBC, and one of the things that the reporter said was, do you kind of wish that the Ontario government would kind of come out and make some vaccine mandates and sort of do your work for you? And I said, well, my inclination is not really that the government should be doing my work for me. And by the way, as organizations, we're not vaccine evangelists. We're just doing what we think is right for our business. And so at the end of the day, we're making an intentional decision and we think it's right for us. So that whole can require versus require is a big distinction that we need to think about. So next slide, please. So here's the legislation that's impacting all of us as employers. And the small fine print there at the bottom, consult your lawyer, star. I'm not a lawyer, and I'm pretty clear about saying that right up front. So please don't rely on me for legal advice. That would be a bad decision. You should absolutely be speaking to your lawyer if you think that you should. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about that in a few minutes and how lawyers are going to be involved and be probably quite influential in terms of how we move through this piece. So in every province and territory and jurisdiction in Canada, there are various pieces of legislation that impact on employers. As you all know, I'm sure, employment-related legislation is provincially based. However, every province has health and safety requirements, every province has privacy requirements, and every province has human rights requirements, as well as federal requirements in all those areas as well. So there may be some distinction between what the Occupational Health and Safety Act in Ontario looks like compared to the parallel legislation in Alberta or BC, but they are nuances. They're not major differences. And so in all of these jurisdictions, we're trying to balance all of this. So as an employer, I'm responsible for the health and safety of my organization. Everyone's responsible for creating a physically and psychologically safe workplace. I'm also responsible for protecting the privacy of my employees. I'm also responsible for ensuring that I don't infringe on the human rights of any of the individuals in my organization under any of the protected grounds. So on the one hand, I want to ensure that everybody is safe. So I say, thou must be vaccinated. But then how do I know they're vaccinated? I have to ask for proof of vaccination, and that's medical information, which is protected, is private protected information. And then what if somebody has a medical exemption for not getting a vaccine, or has a religious exemption? Well, disability, medical exemption, and religious are both protected grounds under the Human Rights Code in Ontario, which is consistent from province to province. So how do I balance all that? How am I doing that? On the one hand, if I make it a safe environment, I have to infringe on privacy. And then if I infringe on privacy, then maybe I'm not paying attention to ensuring that I am accommodating people's human rights issues. So one of the things that I would say is that I think litigation is coming. I absolutely think there is. Any of you I have some very good friends in the employment bar, and they think this is going to be an incredibly interesting legal and academic time, because we absolutely know that these vaccine policies are going to get challenged. We absolutely know they are. The only issue that all of us need to be thinking about is that we have to be making best efforts to ensure that we are, in the very best way we can, balancing all of these requirements, some of which work well together and some of which may even conflict a little bit. So as an example, we have decided that we have mandatory vaccine policies. It is legal and acceptable to simply collect that proof, as long as we are collecting that proof for one reason and one reason only. And that is whether or not someone is allowed to come in our office, or whether we are going to actually disable their security pass. And so when we started collecting that proof, we had our IT department set up individual private SharePoint sites for each one of our individuals. And what happens is they upload their proof. There's one individual in the firm who gets a notification that that has been uploaded. That is noted, and then that proof, as well as the SharePoint site that it was housed in, are deleted and permanently expunged from the network. So we do not keep any of that information. So while we understand that we have looked at private medical information, we believe we have made best efforts to treat that private information with the respect that it actually deserves. So it's balancing all of these things are the kinds of things that you really need to think about. You obviously will need to think about, if you have unions or employee agreements, then that will need to be taken into account as well. Although interestingly enough, there has been one big case that was grieved that was actually a union case in the construction business, and it was about mandatory testing. And in fact, the union, the business won, the union did not win their grievance on that. So that's one of the very first things that has been tested. And as any of you know, who've ever worked through the legal world, the way law is built, the way law is made, is by challenging things. And so I do absolutely believe that litigations are coming, as I've said. Next slide. Chris went to sleep. It's not very interesting. Okay. So taking a step back a little bit on the vaccine piece, because it is a piece that it prompts a lot of discussion, and it prompts emotional discussion. There was an interesting article on the CBC over the weekend regarding how families have been really, they've really been ruptured in some cases by opinions with respect to vaccines. And I thought this was just an interesting piece, just for to set out the complexity of the situation. This was a piece, as you can see on the BBC, and it's the 5 C's around vaccine hesitancy. And what I think it does is, it, for all of us who are trying to make procedure and we're trying to make policy in this, it actually underscores, or should underscore to us, how complex the situation really is. On the one hand, if you have people who are absolutely, completely committed to the idea of the importance of vaccinations and are very emotionally attached to that, it may be difficult for them to factor in some of the rest of these issues that others bring to the table. And so, as with most management issues, it really requires some thoughtful, intentional consideration of why people are being driven to the decisions that they are. And we certainly had an interesting discussion in our environment with someone who has chosen not to get vaccinated. And they had a very interesting discussion with us that was wrapped up in some concerns about their physical health, some concerns about their mental health. They were very, they made a point of talking to us about it. And it really made me realize what a complex situation this is and how difficult this is for all of us who are trying to be consistent with respect to how we run our businesses going forward. Next slide, please. So I wanted to tell the Crowe Soberman story, and with I suppose with a view to thinking that here's what we did right, and here's what went well, and here's where we could have done things a little differently. So one of the things that we did with our employees, and just to put things in perspective, we have about 200 people. There are 33 partners, and the rest are our staff. And we've done a fair amount of surveying throughout this period. And we surveyed a lot about remote work and how things were going, what kinds of supports they needed. And in our third firm-wide survey, we then surveyed about vaccines. And what we did was we asked, have you been or are you intending to be vaccinated? And the answers were yes, no, and prefer not to answer. And so we got a very high uptake on the survey. And what we learned was that 89% of our individuals either were vaccinated or intended to be. And then the remaining 10% was split between I'm not intended to be and I prefer not to say. And so the prefer not to say you could go either way, right? So you don't know that. So we knew that we were somewhere between 90 and 95% of our folks who were actually committed to the idea of being vaccinated. And so our leadership team, so there's 6 of us on the leadership team, and we all felt very strongly that notwithstanding, we all understood that we had those sort of 3 pillars of legislative requirements: the privacy piece, the health and safety piece, and the human rights piece. We all felt that our first duty to our employees was to provide a safe environment. And we believed that we can provide that safe environment by requiring vaccines and collecting the information that we needed to do in order to make that happen in a very sensitive and confidential way. And so we made the decision that that's the route that we were going to go. Now, one of our affiliate firms in the country, one of their leaders feels very strongly on the other side of that. Not so much that, I don't think so much that he believes not in people, not getting a vaccine, but he believes in that individual choice, that it should be his choice or his not choice. And so their leadership isn't aligned, and that's making it a little more difficult. So my first piece of advice is figure out what your people want, figure out where they sit on things, and then make sure that your leadership is aligned in terms of what you're going to do. We then researched a policy. We have a very extensive, detailed policy with respect to what is required of our people on site, what is required when they go out to visit clients. And we also are very, very specific and very transparent about how we were going to collect the data and what we were going to deal with it. And then we actually came up with an action list. And we shared our action list with the individuals within our firm. We made the decision. We told them that when we anticipated having everything up and running for sort of a soft opening for people coming back and what they required to do, and what the hybrid piece was going to look like. And so what we tried to do is be very step-by-step and communicative with our people every step along the way. And going back to what I said at the beginning about where people's heads are at these days with respect to this, I think that transparent communication has never been more important. People are tired, they're still nervous, they're burned out, they want very much to trust their employers, but their inclination right now is that they're not all that trustworthy of many authority figures at the moment because of where we are. And so transparent communication and really good two-way communication has never been more important, and really important as it relates to this particular issue. I think the other issue it's really important for leaders in this time is to say, we don't know everything. We don't have all the answers. I think one of the things as leaders and managers and business owners, and probably as type A control freak type people who my suspicion is a bunch of us are, we're used to having the answer. We're used to knowing what to do. There's nowhere that you can Google anything and find out probably evidence for pretty much anything, which is part of our challenge right now. But, you can't go on there and say, tell me the very best way to deal with mandatory vaccine policies in a business. Because at the end of the day, there's no right or wrong answer to this. We've been dealing with since February of 2020. We've been working without playbooks, without policies, without procedures, with no history, with no precedent. And we're just figuring out as we go along, as we have with most of these issues. And that's one of the things that's really hard. your staff are looking to you for leadership. They're looking for you to say, well, this is what we're going to do and it's going to work. But we don't really know. It's a very fluid situation, and we've had to really take things into account on a very flexible basis as we've gone forward. Next slide, please. So conclusions. Next slide. So conclusions. Sorry, no slide on the conclusions. So we're going to actually go into questions. So I think that my conclusions would be, as I just said, we are working in a time where there's not a lot of precedent. We have, in order to make the best decisions, we have to take all of the information that we have at our hands and put it together and analyze it and sort of run it through the computer as it relates to how our own business is run. I really do believe that we need to ensure that we remember that the business needs and the institutional needs are inextricably linked with individuals' needs. The two of them are not separated. At the end of the day, if you have an engaged workforce who feels safe, who feels trusting of the way that they're being led, then your business will continue to be successful. It may have some challenges, but it'll continue to be successful. And so those are the kinds of things that I think we're all dealing with. We're all learning from each other. There's no doubt about that. And I really wish all of you the best of luck going forward. We really have all figured this out together as on a go forward basis. And I'm now delighted to take some questions. And I think there's one in the chat that I see now. Should I just go and take a look? Oh, no, it just says, please use the chat feature if you have any questions. So I'm happy to take any questions that anyone might have as it relates to specifically on the vaccine side, on the policy side, or on remote work.
And Susan, I have several questions that have been provided. So
okay, great.
Chris is going to allow my video to come on, so you just don't hear my deep voice.
Your disembodied voice, yeah.
But as we look at the beginning of the presentation, we had a few questions about kind of adapting to a more hybrid model, adapting to technology. So of all things businesses are investing in, which of the new operating standards do you think will stick because they're just a better way of doing business?
I think that's a fantastic question. I'll give you an example on that. We're a big training office because we hire students out of university. And so we're training all the time. And we had to move all of our training platforms online. And in fact, we've now been given the impression by all of our partners that even if we go back to the office right now, we should never go back to the old way of training. So online training platforms with polling features, with breakout room features, with the ability to share screens, share video, embed video very easily, has really made our training functions much more efficient. They've made them much more engaging for people. We're not dealing. We find that people's their attention spans are probably about the same as they were, but they're much more easy to be kept engaged. So I think onboarding, training, all of those kinds of virtual techniques have found a home, and I don't think that we're going to go backwards. I also think that some of the things that we really believed that we needed to have paper to do, we have been forced to realize that we don't need paper to do them, that there is another way. It's the whole necessity as the mother of invention kinds of things. And so I think that some of the things that we've done to make things possible while we've been remote, we can actually move them to something permanent. I think one more thing, I see some questions about vaccines, but one more thing that I think that we should be thinking about as well is that there's been a lot of discussion over the last 18 months on diversity issues. Yeah. So diversity, equity, inclusion issues. We have a DEI platform that we're just rolling out now, and we actually believe that ongoing remote and hybrid work will actually assist with diversity issues in our organization because, where it was in the accounting world, tax season is this period of time where you never see your family, you don't see them for 4 months. And frankly, it's a big stumbling block, particularly for people that want to have a family because they don't want to spend 4 or 5 months of the year never seeing their families. Well, when they're working remotely, they don't have that issue. Yeah. And so we think that one of those obstacles maybe actually taken away by the opportunity to work hybrid on a hybrid basis.
Susan, just staying on that topic, because we have a bunch of vaccine questions that are going to come in. When you are recruiting now,
Yep.
Especially for new graduates, what are they asking for? Have you seen differences in that approach? Obviously, and how have you had to handle that onboarding during COVID?
Yeah, I mean, they are definitely asking, and we are going further afield as it relates to our geography and our recruiting. Yeah. And so they are asking whether or not they can work remotely. Many of them don't want to work remotely full time, but they'd like to work remotely sort of half time. And they're asking about whether or not that they can do that. And we have taken the position that we are paying attention to that. And I don't know whether this is not, I think, strictly kind of COVID related or remote work related, but the two questions that we are hearing more and more now from employees, from potential employees, from recruits are, what are your diversity and inclusion policies? And also, where do you stand on sustainability? And so, what are you doing to ensure that we are, how are you supporting making sure that we're taking care of our planet? And we're hearing a lot of that. We actually have a bunch of affinity groups in our organization. And we now have one called Crowe Soberman Climate Crusaders. And we have this Project Neutral project that we're doing right now, where we have teams of people that are figuring out what their carbon footprints are in their homes. And there's little contests in terms of who can make their homes, who can reduce their carbon footprint. And those are the kinds of things that we're trying to do more and more in order to keep people engaged with each other. So they're like these groups that we can have lunch and learns. We can't all get together and have Harveys and in the lunchroom anymore, but we can get together and talk about something that a bunch of people are really interested in. And so we're really trying to do that too. And
it can obviously help instill a level of culture in your organization that that may have not been there before.
Absolutely. That's very true. Very true.
Moving on to the popular topic of vaccines. The first one came in, and I do want to read it out directly, just for those who don't see it. Any suggestions on how to adjudicate the medical and religious exemption requests for vaccination?
That's a fantastic question. So, first of all, if you have an organization that has a short-term disability claims adjudicator, you might consider using that adjudication process for any medical exemption claims. The fact is that the medical exemptions are fairly narrow. They're about allergens to the vaccine, specific cardiac issues that people have to be careful about. I think that is one of those situations that you have to ensure that you are being very, very careful about privacy, as well as being very careful about the whole safety issue. So if you can have them independently adjudicated or have them medically ensure that you have appropriate medical documentation, that's a very important step for you to actually take in this particular case.
Another question, what are you doing with those employees who have chosen not to be vaccinated? Are they allowed to work remotely indefinitely?
So that's a fantastic question, and it is a day-to-day question. Yeah. As it stands right now, we are still completely remote until January. So we have effective November the 1st, the desk booking software will be up and running, and we will do a bit of a soft opening so that people can go in the office. So currently, there is no reason why someone who chooses not to be vaccinated cannot continue to work remotely. Now, there's a little bit of a distinction here. So we've asked all of our folks to upload their vaccine proof. If they haven't uploaded their vaccine proof, this can be for one of two reasons. They're either not vaccinated or they choose not to tell us. And on the choose not to tell us piece, there's no reason to tell us right now because they can continue to work remotely. Now, once we go back to the office in January, and we have a relatively small number of people, some of our roles can in fact continue to be done remotely. There are some of our roles that on an ongoing basis cannot, however. And so we are prepared in January to, if people still maintain that they will not be vaccinated or they don't want to share, we will be prepared to tell them that it's a bona fide occupational requirement of their job and that they're going to have to move on. And, that will involve termination and severance because it's not a for cause issue, but it might very well be that that's the case. And so we will ensure, it's a small number, we will ensure that they have as much notice as possible. Mm-hmm. And I totally understand, no, at the end of the day, in the same way that someone says, well, you want me to come back to the office full time, I want to work remotely. Well, if you can find a job that suits you, that works, and you want to do that, awesome. We can't be perfect for everybody. We can't be the employer for everybody. And so, if we've decided that the vaccination status is something that's really important to us for 230 people, and there are 5 or 6, then sadly we may have to part company with them, and we've accepted that. So, we're not there yet.
Yeah. Many of us who are on the call today, there may not be a distinct HR manager in place.
Yep.
Any tips for those organizations on really how to have that conversation with an employee if they were to implement some form of vaccine mandate?
I think the first key is to have a policy, to have a really well thought out policy. And I do have a precedent, which I'm happy to share with anybody who might want that. So to have a really well thought out policy, because it gives you a basis for discussion. And so, you need to have a basis for discussion about why you've chosen the policy that you have. You have to be consistent. So it is incredibly important that if you have taken a stance with respect to the vaccination piece, that you are consistent between employee to employee, recognizing that in our case, we do have people that can continue to work remotely entirely. So you have to be consistent. You can't pick and choose who you decide you're going to apply the policy and who you don't. So ensure that you, as a business owner or manager, know exactly what you stand for. Make sure that you do all your homework and then have a consistent conversation. And so that's really the most important thing. And also to listen to to people's concerns, like really listen to how they're feeling about things. Because at the end of the day, there are people who are really troubled, like seriously very troubled by the whole concept of the vaccine. And whether it's logical or it's not logical, it's still real to them. And so we really need to be able to validate what it is that they're talking about and trying to make things work for them as best as they can.
Mm-hmm. Another question, and can you speak to the details surrounding religious exemption for the vaccine?
No. No, the answer is I can't. No, this is, I think, going to be very tricky. I don't know if any of you have been reading. There's been a ton of press on this. I am of the belief that if someone came to us and said that I have a religious exemption, I would call my lawyer, because I don't feel that, I know what I've read, but I don't feel confident that I could appropriately adjudicate that request.
Yeah.
I've read a lot about some organizations who do feel that way. There was a fantastic piece. I don't know if it was the CBC or it might have been a US news source, about the distinction of religious exemption and exemptions of conscience, and that a religious exemption and exemption of conscience isn't the same thing. And those are the kinds of things that I think that all of us as leaders have to be really careful about wading into. So that would be one of those that I would call my lawyer and say, someone's presenting me this, what do I do? And by the way, I think the lawyer probably will say, take a stand in terms of what you think might work for your business, but you might hear about it. Like this, I truly believe that, when I say the litigations are coming, I think the litigations are coming about religious exemptions first and foremost. I think that's going to be the one that we really see. I live in southwestern Ontario. I was one of those people who moved out of the metropolitan of the GTA when all this started. I live in southwestern Ontario, and there are some very significant communities in this area that are they have some very strong feelings on these things. And so, and I've had some really interesting conversations with them. They're very closely held and they're very passionate about them. And they're not a conversation I would want to get into from a business leadership perspective without consulting.
It is a.
So I wish I could do something definitive, but I think that's a non-definitive one.
Yeah. And you make that point there, individuals on both sides who are very passionate about the issue. And especially in the workplace where it's over Zoom or it's email or text, they're having these conversations.
Yeah.
How do you work to instill culture in your organization, maintain that while knowing that there are going to be differences in opinions on such an important topic?
Yeah, I think, when I did my introductory piece and I talked about how at the beginning we were all really unified and we're all in this together, and then there's been these divisions that have happened. I think that what we've tried really consciously to do is recognize that there are differences of opinions on certain issues, but there are commonalities of interest that actually cross over those. And so, you might very well have two people who come from very different religious backgrounds or very different cultural backgrounds or very different opinions on vaccines, but they might all like to cook, or they might all be interested in the environment, or they might all want to be in a book club. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to recognize that people are not one-dimensional, they're many dimensionals. And so, in the same way that I've said that look at the commonalities between what's important for the institution and what's important for the individual and find out where they mesh.
Yeah.
Well, think about the things that people have in common as opposed to the things that are differing them, and try to really focus on the things that they have in common. Because if you can actually help people develop a relationship about something that they have in common, it may even engender conversation about the things they disagree on, and may give an opportunity for them to have a conversation about something that they disagree on. I mean, look, we've all seen how strongly people feel about these issues, and I think there are absolutely as many as, if not more, people who feel strongly that they just don't want to be told to get the vaccine, as don't want to get the vaccine. In fact, they may very well have. They just don't want to be told to do it, and I get that. I have a 29-year-old son who's stubborn as you know what, and we were having a big birthday celebration, and we finally said, you can't come unless you get vaccinated. And so eventually he got vaccinated. He just didn't want to be told to do it. That's all. So until his father told him.
And when the father says that, then the line is drawn.
No, when the father says you can't come. Oh, and when he also became aware, he's a very big football fan. So when he also became aware that he couldn't go watch the TFC play anymore without a vaccine, then he's not going to miss his football. So there you go.
One last question that's come through, Susan. There are industries out there that are seeing issues around labor shortages.
Yeah.
Can you kind of discuss the balance there for some of those industries, whether it's service, manufacturing, where they're trying to balance this and this is a bit of a misconception almost that vaccine mandate would impact labor shortage or even prolong it even further.
Yeah.
What do you say to those industries and those business owners that may feel that way?
Yeah, I think so. So I think that is definitely a big issue. I have a client who's actually they're actually a US based commercial food production company, and they're in a number of different states as well as 2 provinces, and so there are different vaccine requirements for each of them, and they are definitely having issues with respect to labor shortages and staff shortages. So one of the things that they have done in their jurisdictions where they have the most issue is they're incentivizing people to get the vaccine, and so they are providing time off, they're providing bonuses, they're providing gift cards, they're actually incentivizing them to go and get vaccinated. Now, that's not going to be, if you have a religious issue, or if you have a medical issue, or if you have that very, very strong conscious issue, somebody saying, I'm going to give you a $250 bonus and a half day off isn't going to be enough. But it's enough for some people. It's enough for some people. And so that's what I am seeing. I'm seeing that sense of incentivizing people in order to get the vaccine and to move forward. In particular, one of this client has a huge plant in the Midwest, and they did a huge incentive plan, and it actually worked fairly well. So.
Now, Susan, obviously talking about the work that you do with your clients, thought we'd give the opportunity as well. Can you describe a little bit about the work that the HR consulting practice does at Crowe Soberman?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm delighted. So our consulting practice really grew up because so many of our clients don't have dedicated HR functions, or they may have a practitioner who keeps the trains running and does the payroll and makes sure that all the compliance is done. But when more when other kinds of HR situations arise, they don't have anybody to help them. And so we started just providing sort of ad hoc help about 10 years ago to our clients, and then really realized that they really did a more fulsome service. So we do everything from HR audits, which is when we go in and we look at everybody's, all of the HR policies and procedures and ensure that everything's compliant, or even put in policies and procedures where there aren't before. We also do performance management systems. We're actually in the process of doing 2 different performance management systems for 2 different organizations. We assist with recruiting. We're not recruiters, but we do assist with recruiting in terms of doing job descriptions and helping people down that road. We provide outsourced HR. So for a couple of our clients, a number of our clients now actually, we have a dedicated HR person and it's interesting. It is more the management and leadership that ends up consulting us for ongoing sort of advice, but we're also there for their employees as well. And so we basically do pretty much everything that you can imagine on an HR perspective for our clients. And we have different relationships with each of them. Some of them are retainer, some of them are project-based. We did a big transition and succession management review with a private construction company a little while ago. So that was really interesting. So, pretty much anything that you could speak to an HR person to do, we're there to do. And it's not just if someone doesn't have an HR, sometimes they do, but something really sticky comes up that they need some additional assistance with. And we're able to help them with that. So we have a department of 5 now. So, and each one of them has some different specialties. So it's been really fun. And it's been a very interesting process over the last 18 months, having helped from downsizing and layoffs and then recalls and communication pieces and working with business owners on all of these things has been very gratifying in order to be able to help them, for sure. And
it's been a complex and challenging year and a half, and I think you probably have learned immense amount during this time.
Yes. In some cases, knowledge that I hope never to repeat in similar situations. But no, it's been and I have to say, for small businesses, I mean, one of the things that really struck me and I found very heartwarming, to put it, in a really basic way, was that especially we have lots of businesses that are in food and beverage and in retail, and the business owners would call me and say, like, I don't know what's going to happen in my business, but these people were beside me every step of the way. They helped me build my business. I need to help them. I need to support them. Yeah. And that kind of solidarity between the business owners and the workers was really nice to see. Like, nobody called me up and said, how do I get out of this the best for me? They were like, how do I help my people? Mm-hmm. And, that said a lot about how, the character and the courage of those people. And so it was, from that perspective, it was very heartwarming. So.
Well, Susan, we will be sending out this video to all of our attendees afterwards, and your information will be included in there as well. So for those of you on the line who may have some follow-up questions for Susan that she wasn't able to answer today, you will be able to communicate her directly as well. But Susan, thank you so much for joining us. So insightful. The topic of vaccine is a complex issue, and you were able to help really navigate that as best possible as you can today for us. So thank you so much. We so appreciate it. And thank you everyone for attending our another keynote speaker series. We'll be back in November. So thank you again, and everyone have a fantastic Wednesday. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.